If a person wishes to evoke the sense of the more corrupt and unwholesome side of nature, it is not uncommon to conjure up thoughts of some sort of slime. This is fair enough, as a great many invertebrates make use of slime in one form or another. Beyond this, the putrefaction of animal remains often results in a semi-solid or altogether liquid material of a distinctly slimy consistency. Even within human systems, an excess of mucus in the upper respiratory tract is often an indicator for infection, or at least some distinctly unpleasant allergies. Now, any reasonable biologist will quite rightly assert that even slime has its place. Mucus and similar substances are an important component within a number of physiological systems, both in humans and other forms of life. Still, there are a few forms of life that take sliminess to an altogether unprecedented level. One such creature is a fish of sorts that tends to be found within the deeper parts of the ocean. In actuality, this form of life seems more like some sort of strange hybrid between a fish and a worm. It lives mainly as a scavenger, feeding off whatever carcasses find their way down to the benighted abyssal plains. In scientific terms, these creatures are found within the class Myxini, which more or less translates into the slimy ones. More commonly, they are known as the hagfish. Hagfish are technically classified as vertebrates, though only barely so. They are regarded as jawless fishes along with the lampreys. These two groups collectively make up most of the clade known as the Cyclostomata. This name translates roughly into circle mouths, in contrast to the Gnathostomata, which translates into jaw mouths. One might easily surmise that the Gnathostomata are the jawed vertebrates, which include both fish and tetrapods. At a glance, a typical hagfish looks something like an eel. Indeed, another name for the creature is the slime eel. It is a long, slender creature that swims in a sluggish fashion with languid, sinuous undulations. The coloration ranges mainly through various hues of gray, brown, and dull pink, depending on the species and the environment. Upon closer inspection, the hagfish is revealed to be quite different to a proper eel in several regards. It is a distinctly vermiform creature, altogether lacking in the fins and scales seen in more typical fish species. The nearest approximation to a fin is the thin dorsal and ventral extensions towards the back of the creature, giving its tail something of a paddle shape. There are no eyes either, merely eye spots that can detect light levels but are incapable of forming proper images. Still, there are other senses that are somewhat more useful in the darkness of the deep ocean. An array of fleshy barbels emerges from the head, usually with four grouped closely around a single large nostril that is sometimes mistaken for a mouth. The other barbels, usually 2 or 4, are found on either side of the actual mouth below this nostril. While the hagfish does have a mouth, it does not have proper jaws. Instead of the standard pattern of an upper and lower jaw, the throat contains a pair of flexible, eversible plates. These plates are normally folded together while retracted, with each extending forward from a joint in the middle. When this structure is brought forward, these plates fold outward to either side. As a result, several rows of backward-pointing teeth are exposed on the interior surfaces of both the left and right plates. In truth, these teeth are quite different to those found in proper vertebrates. They are not calcified structures. Instead, they are made of keratin. Biochemically, they are more akin to claws or horns than actual teeth. Even so, they are quite sharp and highly effective at collectively gripping and tearing flesh. This is their essential function, as these creatures are mainly scavengers. When the hagfish brings its teeth forward, they readily sink into anything soft enough. A rotting fish carcass is often the target of such attentions. Withdrawing the teeth generally causes bits of decaying flesh to be ripped away for swallowing. Still, some corpses are a bit tougher than others, and lacking proper jaws tends to leave the hagfish with a bit of a leverage problem. However, it can employ a most unusual method to help it pull away resistant scraps of food. These creatures are vertebrates by only the most generous of definitions. They have rudimentary vertebrae, but what passes for a spinal column is relatively undeveloped. While this does have its drawbacks, it makes the hagfish a remarkably flexible creature. Thus, if it is in need of a bit of extra leverage, it can essentially tie its body into a basic overhand knot. This knot begins at the tail and is brought forward until it is pressing against the surface of whatever the hagfish is eating. This allows it to pull its head away with considerable force and hopefully pull away a few bits of food in the process. This flexibility and capacity to tie itself into knots is also useful in its distinctive form of self-defense. Every hagfish species has several paired slime glands within its body, which open into a series of pores running down either flank. The material produced in these glands is quite remarkable in a couple of regards. First, its volume expands several thousand-fold upon contact with seawater to create a fairly absurd amount of slime within a fraction of a second. Second, this slime contains a web of thin, resilient protein fibers that make it considerably more cohesive and elastic than other sorts of mucus. Thus, if a predator catches a hagfish in its jaws, it tends to end up with a surprisingly large mouthful of particularly viscous slime. Meanwhile, the hagfish, with its loose, baggy skin and lack of any scales or other hard protrusions, is able to slip free. It will often do so by tying the front of its body into an overhand knot and moving the knot backward to the tail, effectively wiping the slime from its skin before swimming off. Now, this slime is not merely an inconvenience. One might recall that fish typically have gills closely associated with their throats. If this mouthful of slime were to find its way further back, it could easily clog the gill slits and effectively suffocate the would-be predator. To avoid this rather ignominious demise, most creatures are pretty well obliged to spit the offending glob of toughened mucus out. Such potentially suffocating properties might well be put to other uses by the hagfish in more predatory ventures. It would seem that at least some hagfish actively hunt for living prey, as well as scavenging on corpses. One example of such potential prey is the red bandfish, Cipolla hastii. This slender fish lives in a burrow on the sea floor. It would seem that a hunting hagfish is able to easily descend into this burrow and produce a copious amount of suffocating slime to render its prey altogether helpless. One might ask just how the hagfish manages to survive its own slime and why it does not succumb to oxygen deprivation. After all, the creature does have its own gills. However, the skin appears to be rather permeable and likely functions as an additional respiratory surface. In addition to this, hagfish metabolism is fairly sluggish overall, leaving it with relatively low oxygen demands. Furthermore, the creature's physiology seems to be especially tolerant of anaerobic conditions, more so than most vertebrates at least. It can also cope with high concentrations of carbon dioxide and ammonia. In other words, the conditions one might find in the interior of a decaying corpse at the bottom of the ocean. Disturbing though it may be, it is not at all uncommon for hagfish to find their way inside various carcasses as they feed. It would seem that the permeable skin confers an additional benefit in such an environment. A hagfish can apparently absorb at least some nutrients through its skin. Though it is doubtless unpleasant to our own sensibilities, the fetid seawater within a decaying corpse is likely to be relatively rich in dissolved nutrients, ready to be absorbed without even bothering with ingestion. Thus, the slippery little monsters will often dine by consuming their meals from the inside out. Usually such meals consist of sufficiently large carcasses, but hagfish will sometimes feed on the dying as well as the dead. I see no great need to dwell too deeply upon that unpleasant fate. Although the hagfish seems more like an eldritch horror than a fish of any real sort, it is by no means a useless creature. As a scavenger, it is important in the nutrient recycling of the deep sea. Beyond this, it finds several potential uses in human endeavors. To begin with, there are parts of the world where people consume hagfish as a regular part of their diet. South Korea is perhaps the most prominent example. The tough, slender fibers found within hagfish slime may one day find use as a resilient fiber for clothing or other textiles. Still, it would seem that research into this is as yet ongoing. A more immediate use is seen for the skin of some hagfish species. As it turns out, it can be tanned into an especially durable sort of leather, perfect for things like belts or wallets. Still, the name leaves something to be desired. As most consumers are unlikely to purchase a hagfish skin wallet, the leather product is most often referred to as eel skin instead. Despite their many oddities, and most likely because of them, the hagfish are a rather successful and widespread group. They may seem like the veritable epitome of foul, slimy creatures, and their deep-sea home can be a realm of nightmares in its own right. Still, whatever else they might be, the hagfish are incredibly well adapted as scavengers, even if they lack the jaws to properly bite into their meals. Beyond this, they are fairly famous, or infamous, for having one of the most effective and unsettling defensive mechanisms encountered in the natural world. Thank you for listening. I hope you have enjoyed this brief glimpse into the more unusual side of the natural world. If you wish to know more, here are a few things that might be worth looking into. If you found this enjoyable, feel free to leave a like. If you think others would enjoy this content, by all means, share. If you have something to say or ask about, honest comments are always welcome. If you wish to see more from this channel, a subscription would be most helpful. Until next time.